You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Chapter 21. Building Work and a Picnic. Almost 4 years previously, Soviet infiltrators successfully planted a thermonuclear device in the Pentagon building in Washington, D.C. The high-yield device was set in place during maintenance work carried out at a position between two floors, at a point adjacent to an exterior wall. The work involved pouring concrete into a structural support column shuttering, with reinforcing steel rods embedded at its center. A large area was deliberately made available by a modification of one of the air conditioning shafts, and at this position the device was embedded in concrete. Connections were made to a hidden receiving aerial prior to the embedding, and the work was completed within 2 months. Certain panels were put into position to give the impression that the area was similar to all other areas in the same position throughout the building, thus completely concealing the bomb's existence. A Soviet satellite had been launched and placed into a high geosynchronous orbit, whereupon it could relay encrypted data streams to and from ground stations in the Soviet Union directly to the bomb's receiving area. For the bomb to be armed and detonated, a series of extremely complicated encoded data bursts had to be accurately received and decoded by the bomb's onboard computer. The low-power primary battery would remain fully charged to receive the signal to connect it with the secondary battery relay to switch on the computer's arming program. A full 18 separate encoded signals from the satellite overhead would need to be received and decoded before detonation, a fail-safe procedure to ensure that accidental arming of the bomb could not happen. This nuclear bomb was far more powerful than the Anglo-American device now removed from beneath the Kremlin. It was a hydrogen bomb. It wasn't beyond the limits of detection, but incorporated specifically designed shields of high-tech mu alloy lead laminates to contain emitted radioactivity. It sat there waiting the signals to annihilate the district, the Pentagon, the White House, and everything else for miles around. The reason for deploying this bomb was for the same reason the Anglo-American Secret Services deployed theirs, as a blackmailing first strike stratagem. The difference, however, was that the Soviets thought of the idea and carried it out well before the now aborted Kremlin device was put into position by Nathan Fraser, together with the essential guidance of Natasha and her band of Western sympathizers. The Pentagon bomb was checked daily by the satellite for any possible malfunction or discovery. The bomb's concrete casing contained dozens of strain gauges of the type used in engineering and weld testing for brittle fracture. If any part of the concrete was tampered with or suffered damage in any way, such as an earthquake, the Russians would have that information relayed back to them via satellite, powered by the primary battery. Not far away, a U.S. government research department was underway with a communications project closely linked to President Reagan's SDI Star Wars program. The work presently being undertaken was to find a way of communicating with U.S. satellites, avoiding any detection or interference from enemy transmissions, either ground or satellite transmitted. All manner of transmission devices, wavelengths, and frequencies were tried in experimental conditions on the ground and with a test satellite in orbit. It was during these months of testing suitable transmission frequencies that all but one of the Pentagon bomb's fail-safe activation code frequencies were tripped. The Soviets were unable to halt this situation, being totally swamped by the barrage of signal wavelengths and frequencies sweeping across the spectrum, nor could they admit to the bomb's existence. Thousands of miles away in their Hampstead home, Jane was preparing a special meal for them both as a picnic in the garden. They both loved picnics, many of them spent at Grantchester Meadows by the River Cam, with a punt hired from the local boatyard in Newnham, and moored between the hawthorn bushes in little secluded spots along the meadow bank opposite the OCA willows on the far bank. For Mark and Jane, picnics and Cambridge went together. The very mention of one conjured up a vision of the other. Although this one was supposed to be in a London garden, it was the one garden you would choose if you were not by the river in that special Cambridge meadow. Mark was relaxed, lying on an enormous tablecloth, when Jane called from the open kitchen window. "Come on, lazy bones, show a leg. I've got 5 large plates to cart out there." "Okay, I'm on my way," he shouted and leapt to his feet. "You take those 3, I'll manage the others," she said, feeling proud of her culinary achievement. "Why are they all covered up?" he remarked. "Is it all very secret?" he asked, picking up one corner of a napkin. She slapped his hand away. It was obvious Mark was in one of those looning about moods. Jane knew he was happy, and that was the main thing. She didn't want any dark moods to spoil this occasion, all on their own in that wonderful garden. It was late summer, about 6 in the evening, a bit late for tea on the lawn, perhaps, but what did that matter? They could just as easily have had one at midnight. In fact, they had decided that on an exceptionally warm evening, they would do just that. After tucking into the delights made by Jane's fair hand, Mark complimented her on the best picnic food he had ever had the pleasure to eat, and in the company of the cook, who by coincidence was also the best-looking girl in town. As the evening progressed, they talked about their adventures in Cambridge at the hospital, and at the flat, and their very first meeting when, as Jane could now tell him, she was hell-bent on getting to know him. They laughed at the funnier times, and at the time when Mark could only think of building his machine. He apologized profusely. Later on, Mark and Jane wandered down to the old summer house. It held that certain indescribable magic which was all its own, especially as they had recently learned of his mother's illicit love-making there all those decades ago. Once inside, under the narrow radial beams which supported the roof, now peeling its yellowed white paint as if in an attempt to start redecorating itself, Mark became serious and quiet. "Are you all right, love?" she asked, rather concerned. "Is it your mother you're thinking about because of the summer house?" She tenderly placed her hand behind Mark's head and ruffled his hair a little. "I wasn't thinking of Alice in particular, more about us, you and me." He held Jane in his strong arms and passionately kissed her. "Wow," she joked, as she regained her breath. "I want you to marry me and live in this house. What do you say?" He looked longingly into her eyes as if his life now depended upon her reply. He felt it did. He could not imagine life without her now. He had grown more fond of her as those difficult times had passed than ever he thought possible. It was painful for him not to be close to her. He had experienced true love, that was for sure. "Well? Well, what?" she asked. "Marry me, if that's what you want." By now he could feel nervous perspiration forming on his forehead. He still didn't know what a reply might be. "Well, of course I will. You don't think I would have stuck with a maniac like you if I didn't love you, do you?" They both cried and laughed in equal measure with happiness. Everything was perfect. "Natasha could be our housemaid," Jane suggested, as they sat down on the ancient boards. "2 good-looking girls in the same house?" added Mark. They both sprawled on the worn wooden floor with laughter that seemed to be an extension of their tears of ecstasy, their emotions heightened at the thought of their future life together. A real-life doctor and nurse love affair. The evening sky began to redden, a time they both loved.